Well, the political news agenda this week was dominated by a man who was Prime Minister, the man who is Prime Minister, and the man hoping to be the next Prime Minister.
If you would please unveil the portrait.
Stephen Harper was in Ottawa for a series of events to mark the 20th anniversary of his breakthrough election win. A highlight was the unveiling of his official prime ministerial portrait, and Harper punctuated the week of celebration with some poignant comments about the need for Canada to pull together and to pivot away from the United States.
We must make any sacrifice necessary to preserve the independence and the unity of this blessed land. We must reduce our dependence on the U.S. in order to protect our sovereignty and our economy.
The current Prime Minister seems to be heeding that advice with a new auto strategy that tries to save the sector from U.S. aggression while managing Canada's climate ambitions. Also this week, Mark Carney sat down with the Prime Minister in waiting, with Pierre Poilievre is promising a new era of cooperation after Conservatives have given him a second chance. That's a lot for our party insiders to dig into. We've got Greg McEachran here. He's a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative national campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is the former director of communications for the federal NDP. Good to see you all. Fred, happy anniversary, because I think you're the only one on the panel who celebrates today. I don't think Mel and Greg are in on that one. I wonder what you made of your old boss, Stephen Harper. You know, we must sacrifice what is necessary to preserve the independence of the country, but also one of the most pro-American prime ministers the country has seen saying we have to pivot aggressively away from the United States based on the new reality.
Yeah, look, I think it's one thing this week we felt it was a great reminder of what excellent leadership we had in Prime Minister.
Okay. Oh, hi, Melanie, David, Greg.
Premier, we have a one appearance a week rule, but it's good to see you again. How are you?
Speaking of great leadership, but never know what happens in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, Fred is at the PC Nova Scotia AGM, by the way, and why do I feel like we got played? But anyway, go ahead, Fred.
I'm with you on that. But look, it was Harper. This week was a great reminder of Harper's leadership, and I think how so many Canadians missed him and what he did. Look at his record and what he did with free trade. Right when he became Prime Minister, we had 5 free trade agreements. When he left, we had 51, and it really showed the focus that he knew we needed to have, getting our products to market. And what we're talking about now with this whole situation with the U.S. is, you know, everything is so dependent on the U.S., all of our trade, and we don't have pipelines built, we don't have things moving, and we're in this tricky situation. And I thought it was interesting when he made the comment about how Trump, you know, we shouldn't be just blaming Trump for the situation, because, you know, it's a lot of what we haven't done in the last 10 years. Things have slowed down so much in this country, and it's good to see. You know, I think everyone seems to be aligned now finally that we need to get back to what Harper wanted to do, and that's getting products to market.
Mel, it was interesting, though, to see the alignment between Mr. Harper, Mr. Carney, and Mr. Chrétien when he appeared with Stephen Harper in an event on Monday. Like 3 leaders who have dealt with crises from the U.S., from 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, the global economic crisis, and now, all broadly with the same idea of how to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really true to how people are feeling right now. So obviously, different crises and different moments in time where the collaboration obviously was a lot better in the past than it is now. But what I thought was interesting about all 3 of them, I think it's really tied to how people are feeling. I think people are feeling as though despite who is the next president, and of course, an election will come in what is it, 3 years now? Mm-hmm. But even with that election, what is being done today, what has been done over the last year is going to be harmful for years to come, despite who the next president is. And I think it has highlighted for folks in Canada that the status quo doesn't work and that there is a need for us to not, and this, I don't like using this word, but not be held hostage to a country based on how whoever's in the White House is feeling. So the ability to invest in our industries, the ability to invest in building stuff here, but also in diversifying our trade, and the importance that not all our eggs are in the same basket, I think is something that regular folks who maybe are not paying attention to those kinds of things normally feel deeply in their everyday life. So I think the fact that all three of those, former, current prime ministers have consistently said kind of the same thing this week is really true to how people are feeling. So I think that's important and a good message, I think, probably to the other elected folk that folks are clearly saying we need to find a way to work together and figure this out.
But, Greg, it's interesting because, when Mark Carney gave his Davos speech and said it's a rupture, not a transition, he got some criticism and pushback for maybe being over the top. But Stephen Harper basically said the same thing. Yeah. Not as colorfully, maybe, but we must urgently pivot away and sacrifice whatever is necessary. These are not things you say when this is a bump in the trade relationship. These are things a guy like Stephen Harper says when it's a fundamental change in how you view your closest friend and neighbor.
Absolutely, and our Prime Minister has said this. The Trudeau government talked a little bit about this. There was a speech by Minister Freeland, perhaps the pandemic knocked things off. This was during Trump season 1. But the message, as Fred said, has been there for a while that we need to be less dependent on the United States. But what's interesting is Jamil Javani went to Washington this week and put out a tweet saying that Donald Trump sends his love to Canadians. And I think anybody who started watching the news last night and saw that President Trump, 79-and-a-half-year-old, put out a very racist meme about the Obamas. I don't think anyone in Canada really cares today about what Donald Trump thinks of us. And I think this is where the challenge is. We've seen Conservatives, Poilievre last Friday night, very reluctant to say anything bad about Trump. I think Stephen Harper shamed the current Conservatives this week into we have to look after our own country. You have to be together on this. And whether or not Poilievre's, the message the next day that he wants to meet with the Prime Minister's been very clear. He's been open to meet with lots of people.
It's
right?
not the first time they've met, right? It's typical in a minority parliament.
But, we've heard this song before, and we don't know if it's actually going to last. I mean, this was a really good week for the Conservative Party, but I don't think it was that great a week for Pierre Poilievre.
All right, so Fred, on that, I wonder, you do see the alignment with Mr. Harper, Mr. Carney, Mr. Chrétien, but, Jamil Javani is in Washington, D.C., sort of on this unsanctioned diplomacy. And while former Prime Minister Harper was able to lay out a very consistent and clear message on how to deal with the United States, we still haven't heard that kind of from the current Conservative leader. I mean, what do you make of that dissonance between the two there?
Well, I do hope to see something come from Poilievre soon on that. We talked last week at the Calgary Convention about it after his speech, how he wasn't, I would have liked to hear a bit more aggression there from him. But what I've been very happy seeing this week is he seems to be following the advice I gave 10 months ago on the show about how be cooperative right now. Let's see what we can get done. The government has been in power, the Carney government, since the last election for 10 months. They have one bill that's passed the House of Commons in Parliament in itself with the Senate. That's not a great track record. Lots of good speeches, lots of good messages.
We're close on a couple of others. I know, Fred, you like to use that, but there was some good progress this week.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, they are
because the
moving.
Conservatives are like, okay, you guys aren't getting it done. We're going to get in there. We're going to get the GST cut done. We'll go get this stuff done. Because I don't understand why the Liberals, they have not been looking for friends in Parliament. They've been looking for floor crossers, but they haven't been working with the other parties. And I think that's a detriment to themselves and where we are now. And it's good to see the Conservatives stepping up and saying, okay, if you're not going to do it, we'll get this stuff done.
Right, but Emil, also, if you're not going to do it, we'll get this stuff done so you don't have an excuse to call an election in the spring, because we really don't want that right now. I mean, this is the subtext of it all, right? So what do you make of this promise of cooperation and quite frankly, visible signs of actual cooperation between the Conservatives and the Liberals, but this lack of a message to match what Stephen Harper said on the U.S. Still a year after Donald Trump's been in office?
Totally. I was talking to a colleague the other day about what it tells people when you oppose just to oppose. And I think what it tells folks at home is continue to be cynical about politics because we're not sending people to Ottawa to work together to get stuff done. In this time, it is so key for folks to see that kind of progress across party lines. And I don't want to sound naive. This is still politics. You want to win. But there is a way to do that and still supporting the government without necessarily opposing something that in normal times you would have either put on the table or you would have agreed with. So, seeing the shift this week, I'll say I'll stay tuned to see how long that lasts, because we've maybe heard the Conservatives say that they've done a little bit of soul searching and will switch, and maybe hasn't stayed true before. But the ability to say, we believe that the government should be doing this thing, we're glad that they're doing this thing, and we're going to hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they actually deliver and that people see the benefit in their everyday lives. I think that that's a perfect place for the Conservatives to be. And again, you could still be a political party and do that. You can still get your wins and show people the choices and the differences by doing that without just opposing to oppose. So we'll see. But again, the fact that former Prime Minister Harper was saying, you've got to find a way to support this government and in working together, I think, again, is so in tuned to how people are feeling, regardless of where they sit on that partisan line, that they expect us to rise above it a little bit, still criticize where it makes sense to criticize, and make sure that we're making stuff better, but still finding a way to work together in the face of this threat from the U.S.
Right, but Greg, also in what Prime Minister Harper had to say, it wasn't just support the government on this. It's a warning of national unity and policies that threaten the unity of the country, right? I think mostly aimed at what's happening in Alberta with the West, with the resource development, and with the Prime Minister saying they want to move at this speed, but still the frustration at the lack of tangible, actual new things at this point. This is a get on with it message there for the Liberals, I think.
Which is really key for a Prime Minister, perceived to be from the West, from Alberta.
Yeah, that's where he was elected.
Ran and very much identified with. We can look at Quebec and you go back to the Quiet Revolution and, the emergence of the Parti Québécois, a referendum in 1980. Alberta seems to be a little bit different. And you do get the feeling that it's because you're not happy with who was elected Prime Minister. So I think part of what Harper said was that much more powerful because of where he represents, where he's identified with.
So, Fred, the limits of this cooperation from the Conservatives is what I wonder about. Because, the bail reform, it's a half loaf for them. It's not everything they want. The GST rebate, helps on affordability. Who's going to stand in the way of that? The Budget Implementation Act is an $80 billion deficit, right? And that is going to take some cooperation from them to pass. I mean, how does Pierre Poilievre do that?
Right. That's a great question. We'll have to see how this all plays out. I do think, that seems to be the task at hand, is finding these bills that the government is putting forth that the Conservatives can agree with and find some common ground on, and maybe amending, maybe making changes to things. The Budget Implementation Act is an act. It hasn't gone through Parliament at all yet. It could be amended. It could be changed at committee as well. So maybe there'll be discussions there where things can be fixed. And we'll see, is this government finally going to try to cooperate and realize they're not a majority and actually have to listen to some of the opposition parties and have to make some concessions here and there? That's going to be, I think, on top of government's mind right now and what they need to do. If they want this budget to pass, if they want this parliament truly to continue, they do need to be looking for those relationships and those deals.
So Mel, I take Fred's point there. It's up to the government to win the confidence of the House on the Budget Implementation Act and be flexible where need be. But if you're the Liberals right now and you're looking at every public opinion poll in the land where you have a 2-to-1 advantage on Prime Minister and is anywhere from 4 to 14 point lead in party preference, like you're looking at 180, 185 seat majority, right? So how flexible do they need to be, do you think?
That's a good question. Obviously, the Conservatives are the ones who are looking for wins right now. They're the ones who maybe haven't been able to show regular folks that they can be the adult in the room the same way that people view Prime Minister Carney to be. So there's definitely the Conservatives are probably hoping for a little bit more time to show that, so that things turn around. But to Fred's point, a government that wants action on their priorities needs to be able to find someone to work with them to get that done. It always makes me laugh when it's, the opposition's fault that stuff either passes or doesn't pass. It's solely the government's fault if something passes and doesn't pass. Now, does the government need things to pass right now, or are they hoping to be able to go to the polls and put something in front of Canadians? Maybe not, but they will need a reason to do that. I don't know that it'll stick. But definitely they have a little bit more power than the other parties right now, not just because of their government, but because public polling looks good for them right now, and folks are still cautiously optimistic that they sent the right guy to the PMO to face this kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how much they're willing to give and how much they kind of say, well, we're ready to test the public.
You know, Greg, I don't know if Liberals won an election. Some do, some don't. Some, are wary of it, willing to do it, but not eager to do it. They definitely want their majority, though, as sort of the diplomatic efforts to woo people would show. But, just you look at the auto strategy that the Prime Minister rolled out this week, the trips coming up internationally to places like India, the defense industrial policy. There's kind of too much work to be done to play games around an election right now. Is there not, if you're the Liberal government in a time of crisis?
I think the government is very aware that Canadians have a mindset right now about togetherness. We are in this, we have to work together. I think what they're conscious of, that Canadians are looking for some direction from the government. How can we help? What can we do? We've got the Olympics on right now. The World Cup is coming. Those are great things that you can, we can kind of center around. But you are not going to have people come on board with you if you are calling an election and it looks like you're calling the election for just your own gain. And, I recall 2021, Liberals were ahead, I think, by 9 points. They called the election. They spent a lot of the first part of that election explaining or not explaining why they had called an election, and they lost that ground immediately. So you have to have a really good
narrative, Fred?
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest part of it. The other thing I think, what I notice is that you don't see very many other Conservatives besides Poilievre. You see Andrew Scheer a lot, maybe Melissa Lantsman a little bit. And part of the conversation going into the leadership review was there was nobody else waiting in the wings. Well, yeah, because they don't get really good questions. They have to sound like him. They're not allowed on TV for a long time. And then if it's somebody else, it's Andrew Scheer. I think if he is going to be, true to his word, Poilievre, you start to see other MPs, Conservative MPs, come forward. That could be challenging for the government. But right now, Canadians are seeing Pierre Poilievre, and we see the polls, they don't seem to like him. Andrew Scheer was rejected by voters 2019. So if they're going to continue in that way, you might see more floor crossing. And that may be part of the calculus around an election.
Right. So on narrative, Fred, it leads me naturally to you, as this is the drum you've been beating on the show. There is a narrative for Mark Carney, should he want an election, in that we need a majority to get our agenda through Parliament and to stay strong during the Kuzma review. But that's also kind of the narrative from last year, right? Like, that's been asked and answered. And so unless the Poilievre Conservatives completely backtrack on this promise of cooperation and go like Tea Party Republicans in the House of Commons, it's going to be tough to make that argument at this moment in time, don't you think?
It is, and I could tell you, having I worked for Stephen Harper from his first leadership race for the Conservative Party when he won that, all of the general elections, worked in the Prime Minister's office and the party office. And I can tell you, there's nothing scarier than going to an election when you're in government. You do not want to take that risk and give it up. And there's a lot of risk. Things are so volatile right now. Like, maybe he thinks he could have that narrative. You can look at the polls and think that they're accurate. Call an election, and who knows what happens in the middle of that election that throws them off. And I keep reminding people, the last campaign, the Carney Liberals did not campaign that well. They had a good story going into it. Last week of it, though, Poilievre won the last week of the campaign. He caught fire on that. Something could happen. So it is a huge risk. When you're in power, you want to stay in power for as long as you can, and taking the risk of calling an early election. But of course, if nothing is passing, then if the budget doesn't pass, we'll go anyway. Yeah,
well, that's the big test, right, Mel? And like with what's happening in Alberta, with what's happening in America, look, I think Mark Carney's probably a better politician than he was a year ago, with everything that's happened, but it still would be a pretty big risk in an election. A lot of Canadians might say, I don't know if we need this right now.
Totally. I remember us sitting around the table when, Mark Carney was still in the leadership and we were saying, or being CEO is very different than politics. And then, this week, my own heart was a little bit broken when we saw deputy leader of the Ontario NDP be a candidate. So he obviously understands politics maybe a little bit more.
I mean, Dolly Begum and Danielle Martin is not central bankers, right? Like, that it's an interesting coalition he's building. Anyway, sorry, finish your point.
Totally. So yeah, he definitely is maybe being a little bit more strategic than we and I originally gave him credit for. So yeah, when it comes to an election, you're not going to want to Fred's point, you're not going to risk government for no reason. But we also have heard, for a while that this prime minister isn't necessarily interested in being in politics for a long time. I think he has an agenda to change the path that the country is on, and to, in his own mind, reset what that path looks like or set us on a new path. So maybe, this is a way to do that, to get his majority government, and then he can pass the baton to the next Liberal leader. So I think those are all questions. As a partisan person, I hope we're not going into an election anytime soon, because those are always really a little bit exhausting. But I do think,
Yeah.
come on, I know. But
They're fun. Let's go.
Give us a year at least, please, and thank you. But particularly for us Ontario folks who had two, Fred included. But anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is if the opportunity is there and they see a path to majority, they're going to take it, and that I was in British Columbia in 2020 when people said that Premier Horgan shouldn't be sending us to an election, and it was for his own partisan interests. And that worked out okay for him because people knew that there was an agenda being voted on, and it worked. So if he's able to figure out what that narrative is, and the ballot box question is, he's going to take it, and we'll see how it goes.
But baton passed to Fred tonight. We saw history. It looks like Tim Houston has endorsed Fred Delory as his successor as the next PC leader in Nova Scotia. Congrats, Fred.
Okay, look, we got to leave it there. You can blame the Italian Olympic Committee, and I think Fred's got to go have a beer with Premier Houston. Fred Delory, Melanie Richer, Greg McEachern, appreciate it as always. Thanks, gang.